I liked your presentation yesterday about the monoliths.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Turns out we have a monolith or two at work, so
Everyone's got a monolith in their closet
yeah,
somewhere.
it happens so easily.
Yeah.
It's really easy to keep building on them as well.
Yeah, it's also really easy to follow the hype train.
Oh
And
yeah.
just try to over-decompose your services when you're not really going to see the benefits of it. So I always thought that it was great to set up your monolith in a way that you have the optionality to go and decompose it.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily have to take that leap all at once.
No.
If ever.
No.
Yeah.
So did you start designing your system now with that in mind from the get-go, or was it?
Yeah, pretty much from day one we were designed that way. I think is this on? Pretty much from day one we were designed that way. But it was only about I think 6 months in we spun out our first service.
Yeah.
And it was basically because we had one of those services that had to go to disk a lot, and we wanted to manage that service separately from the rest of our kind of stateless architecture inside that monolith. So yeah, we were able to spin out one of those services pretty easily. We didn't really have to make a lot of code changes. It was a lot more, ops changes and dealing with latency of the network and things like that.
Because the whole ops latency thing, it happens kind of easily as well.
Yeah.
I could really easily break this out. How do I get someone to create a service from it and just manage it on the ops side?
So we actually are built on top of a technology called Kubernetes, which basically, it's a Google open source technology that makes deploying Docker containers really easy. So if you have some sort of message broker and some sort of service discovery mechanism and some kind of container architecture like Kubernetes, it's pretty easy to break out that service and start running the services on a set of machines. The real challenge is, okay, when one of those services dies, what is the failure mode?
Yeah.
How do you deal with a service that's getting slow but not necessarily dead? Things of that nature.
Yeah. So you started with that in mind as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you hadn't started with that, would it have been a huge problem to? Well, I guess it just takes more effort if you built into it already.
It's just a lot more refactoring. It's really how much technical debt do you want to have when you decide, hey, I want to go and move towards microservices.
Yeah.
And I actually think that a lot of the ways that we design software in this monolithic architecture where we assume shared state and passing models to different functions that aren't serializable actually leads to harder to maintain code anyway.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's definitely a thing. But it's still so easy to keep going inside of that.
Yeah. It's important to know when you're like, okay, I'm done with my quick and dirty prototyping phase, and now I want to start moving towards a style of development that's going to be or last a little longer.
Oh yeah. And try to keep to that architecture if you started it as well. I mean, it can be kind of tricky. I start with this really nice. This will be easy to spin out into services, and then it turns out we need to do this little hack over here and just connect those bits directly, and then you start growing the spider web there.
Yep. That coupling is insidious between software components.
But I guess it must have been kind of an advantage for this thinking coming from Facebook before, where you kind of had to think in big decoupled systems.
So yeah, it's really interesting. Lee Byron is giving a talk on GraphQL right now.
Yeah.
And I think that when they announced GraphQL, it was kind of hard for people to wrap their head around it because they're so used to developing this kind of active record style model, where GraphQL is really designed in a way that says, hey, you've got a bunch of different backend systems. You know how to look up different entities in those backend systems by some global ID, and GraphQL will coordinate all of those, all of that data fetching. So you can start, a lot of times, you'll go to GraphQL with a user ID and you'll say, hey, give me all of the names of the events that this user is attending.
Yeah.
So you go to the user service and you say, okay, give me information about the user. And then you'll go to the event service and then get information about all the related events.
Yeah.
And it's two separate backends, but GraphQL is kind of coordinating them.
Yeah. I saw the GraphQL introduction talk at React Europe.
Okay.
And it really appeals to me.
Yeah.
Especially, and also this part about describing what the format of what you want back, because we have so many API related calls where it's, a large pile of parameters is describing the response basically, and
Yeah.
this is so much nicer.
Yeah, I think Lee just mentioned that they've had the same newsfeed, or the newsfeed version from 3 years ago, which is hundreds of releases behind the current version, still works, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. I can barely keep a release of our software working for like a couple of months. You know?
No, I'm happy if it works right after release.
Yeah,
that's. Yeah, so did you take a lot of like thinking from Facebook with you to new things, or is it all, oh, this is new and different, let's have a different approach?
So I'm working on a pretty different product now. Facebook was a big social app. I had also worked on Instagram.
Yeah.
And we were really, our data looked like users and pieces of content and relationships between the users and the content. Smite is a lot different. We ingest kind of analytics data. We analyze it to try to identify patterns of fraud, scams, people using credit cards in a fraudulent way, things like that. So it is a very different problem, but you can kind of, the way that the Facebook architecture was designed was pretty helpful when we're designing this new architecture. So we're able to take a lot more advantage of open source infrastructure tools than Facebook is, just because Facebook's built so much stuff internally. But the general idea of looking things up by a global ID and being able to coordinate accesses across a bunch of different independent services was really helpful.
So a lot of the thinking still applies. And the experience, of course.
Yeah, we're not writing PHP at Smite, so that whole stack, which is very impressive at Facebook, we don't use.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So much stuff. Yeah, I was a bit curious about, I mean, so you've been in React from the very beginning.
Yep.
I don't know, maybe this is a very fluffy question, but how did it seem from the inside when it was sort of expanding? Because from the outside it sort of shows up at some point in everyone's mind. I hadn't heard of React, now I heard of React, and suddenly it's...
Yeah, it's now a safe technology choice.
Oh yeah, and it went really quickly, too.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we open sourced it in May of 2013 at JSConf, so there was a room of all of us at Facebook, like pushing the website, writing the documentation, making sure that the Google group was set up, moderated, and everything. And then I think Tom Okino announced it at like one very specific time, right? It was like 10 a.m. or something. And we pushed the button and we're like on Twitter, we're waiting to see people's reaction. And everyone's reaction was just to hate this thing. I mean, they were like, there's HTML in my JavaScript. Like, what is this? This is never going to work. The people who got past the HTML and the JavaScript thing, they looked at this method of re-rendering over and over and thought that it would be too slow. And really, it was a grind for the first year and a half. People really didn't want to give this technology a chance, and so it was slow going.
Yeah. So what sort of kept you going, like pushing this effort onto people, sort of?
This is kind of funny. I had built a bunch of applications with React, and we had baked React off against a bunch of different technologies internally. So we actually knew that we were right and everyone else was wrong, because we had invested so much time in looking at everything else. So really it was a matter of how do we communicate this thing in a way that people are going to understand. And when you know that you are going to eventually be, or that you are right and you're going to eventually win, it's pretty easy to stay motivated, and you really don't have an excuse for people to not understand your technology. It's like, this is clearly good. You're just doing a crappy job of explaining it.
Oh yeah. So we can do better.
Yeah. So it's simultaneously like motivating, and also you look at yourself and you're like, all right, this person did not get why I like this technology. I need to understand. Like, they're not stupid. I need to understand like why I'm failing to communicate.
Oh yeah. Is that sort of internalized in the culture, or is it something that was particular to the React team? So I watched that building community talk, and I was really impressed about, I mean, how you handle it and sort of really worked with convincing people in a constructive way. Because we've had discussions about this on the podcast from time to time, because one of the guys works on Plex, and they get criticism every time they change something.
Yeah.
Let's just say so.
I mean, so I don't work at Facebook anymore, so I can't really speak to what they're prioritizing now. But I can say when I was there, they're a really big company, and they work on a lot of different things. And so there are pretty basic issues when you're at that scale that you need to have sorted out before you kind of go to the next level. So, for example, making sure that all issues are triaged and handled, and all pull requests are either rejected or merged in or get feedback. There was a lot of infrastructure that they built, and James Pierce has given lots of talks about all the GitHub bots and GitHub metrics and the way that they've organized the company to be a really good open source company. So that, I think, is the main discussions that were being had internally, like how do we scale this open source organization. A lot of the, I think, advocacy stuff was mostly just stuff that I had figured out when we were starting to go into the community.
Yeah, because I could so easily see that go wrong, with a big team of developers and everyone's sort of in a coding mindset and you get defensive about the feedback.
Yeah, there's also just a bunch of engineers that are really talented that work at Facebook that nobody has heard of.
Yeah.
And they just stay internally and they hack out a bunch of awesome stuff. And they just don't really care about the fame of the open source project. They're just trying to build cool stuff.
Yeah.
So that you need a mix of people. Like,
yeah, sure.
Like people like me that, I've worked on the React core, but I'm kind of, my main contribution was convincing people, like, this is worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and that's such a big thing. It's so easy to forget. It's like, okay, my code is done. Here it is.
Yeah.
If you just write something good around it and respond to questions, it makes such a world of difference.
Yeah, it's a lot of communication.
Yeah. So did you have any sort of plan before you started responding to stuff? Like, this is sort of the responses we want to give, or was it just up to whoever wanted to jump in and respond to something?
It's a good question. There wasn't a plan in the beginning. We didn't appreciate what the reaction was going to be. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in React. The fact that, now, what is it, 2 or 3 years later, everybody understands, like, oh, React Native is possible because React was designed in this way to make things like React Native possible and all this animation stuff. And so we were really jazzed about saying, like, hey, we've abstracted away the browser, and you can build applications in the same kind of mental model that'll work across all these different platforms. How cool is that? And that's what we were trying to say. And what everybody else saw was, like, HTML and my JavaScript.
Oh, yeah.
And so we really had to, like, get back and look at the status quo and say, okay, this is how people are building applications today. This is how we're building them internally. How do we kind of address all of these different points and get people thinking in the right way to appreciate the stuff that React has come up with? So I gave this talk at JSConf EU, which is probably like one of the more famous ones, which was basically like, hey, the whole point of it was we are not idiots. Like, we understand why you are separating your templates from your controller code. We get that. We're not missing the point there.
Yeah.
We just have a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And fast forwarding a couple years later, not everybody is on board, but enough people are on board that I think it's proven out that we're not idiots.
Yeah, and the ideas themselves are spreading so much as well. I mean, virtual DOMs are kind of everywhere, and like maintaining immutable state.
Yeah, I mean, people are really thinking about immutable data structures now. React certainly did not come up with that. The Clojure community was trying to bring that to the web for a long time.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just takes the right set of circumstances and the right messaging to kind of take this concept that everybody knows about but doesn't appreciate and get them to appreciate it.
Yeah, I was so happy when you mentioned that in the community talk about this. What was the name of the blog post? The future of the JavaScript
MVCs.
Frameworks. Yeah, because that's where we discovered React, basically.
Oh, yeah.
So we started doing that for one of our apps.
Oh,
then,
really?
yeah, and it went out to customers Monday.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
Tuesday, sorry.
So you're not on call right now?
Not. Well, almost not.
Got it, okay.
If it starts vibrating, No, but it's working out really well, and it was funny because it really suited our problem so well. And just solving the Vue stuff and not getting involved with trying to do everything else at once.
Yeah.
That's also such a big thing, that React doesn't try to sort of expand and have an opinion about everything else.
Yeah.
Was that a big discussion? Or any discussion?
It was a matter of necessity, really. React has always been like a very, very practical technology.
Yeah.
It was never like developed in like a lab in isolation and then only later on applied to an application. It was developed specifically for a couple different applications.
Yeah.
And so if you're dropping something into Facebook, you can't rewrite the whole ads create flow or the whole news feed. You have to be able to incrementally adopt certain pieces of technology. So just the way that it was developed and incubated led to kind of where it starts and where it stops. So we need to be able to render UI components and take over a whole DOM node, but it can't be super opinionated about data fetching in a way that will take over your whole application. It can't assume certain characteristics of the browser, certain performance capabilities of the client.
Is there anything you think that React should be doing or should be doing next, or is it pretty much where it should be?
So I'm a little less involved in the project now than I have.
Yeah, but from your personal...
That's a good question. Facebook open source is doing a lot of different things. The ecosystem around React now has Relay, GraphQL, like 10,000 different Flux implementations.
Yes, it's so.
Flow as well. I think that there's a lot of promise in marrying a component system which has strongly typed property, like props being passed in state, a data fetching system that's strongly typed, and the fact that Facebook has a type system in Flow means that you could probably do a lot of really cool things when you've really tightly integrated those three projects. I don't think that we've really seen there's a lot of promise there. I don't think it's been delivered yet.
No.
But I'm excited to see what that looks like. It looks like also Cheng Lu with React Motion has done a pretty good job of figuring out what a good animation API would look like.
That's so cool too.
Yeah. The real question is, is this going to perform across a wide variety of platforms? Jury's still out on that. React also should probably have a more opinionated answer about CSS. There are a bunch of different competing ideologies there, and there's just, none of them are being dog-fooded by any big player right now.
Which might be saying something in itself, I guess.
Yeah, I think if you have really strong conventions about how you write CSS, it's good enough.
Yeah.
It's not so bad that it's your biggest problem.
No, exactly. It's not anyone's biggest problem, I guess.
Yeah, especially now that we have Flexbox. I mean, the biggest problem was just fighting with the layout system without Flexbox. But now Flexbox, I think, I don't have any complaints about laying things out with CSS anymore since I've started using Flexbox.
Let's see, cover that. I'll jump a bit. Have another thing.
Okay.
No, not that rushed. But if the stage had been ready, we would have started a bit earlier. But anyway, so do you ever feel like you've become the React guy more than you would have liked?
I feel bad guilty sometimes that people think I am the only person involved with React, when I had a big role a couple years ago at a very, very critical time, but there's a lot of people at Facebook that wrote a lot more of the code, and in the past year or so I've kind of taken a step back from the project since leaving Facebook.
Yeah.
But as long as people understand that, I think that I don't know. I think I'm a pretty smart guy.
But you're fine with it personally. Like people keep sort of talking React to you all the time. Or would you?
It's a great technology.
And sure.
It's saved me a ton of time. It's let me leave work earlier and not have to wake up and deal with emergencies.
Yeah,
because it's so predictable.
Sort of how my phone isn't ringing right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's just great technology. I'm really glad to see that it now has a community built around it. It's a little bit weird that for me, we went from being the underdogs and everybody hating this thing.
Oh, yes.
To now, this is, a lot of people call React overhyped now. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's always going to be this thing that everybody, the whole community always hated. Yeah. So you want to, your rhetoric and your communication is going to change once you switch from being the underdog to being, a safe choice.
Yeah.
So now we're not publishing blog posts about why React is better than Angular because everyone gets that React is a choice worth looking into, and they can decide for themselves whether Angular or Ember, React, or Aurelia is going to
Yeah.
be the right choice for their application.
Yeah, it's sort of a thing of trusting the people to make up their own mind and have their own ideas and thoughts, and not talking down to people.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to claw your way up to the table and grab a seat at the table. And once you have a seat at the table, let the community and let each individual engineer decide what.
Be a good person about it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And make sure that there's enough documentation and blog posts out there for people to make an informed decision about their technology stack.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, I think we need to start wrapping up,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, but it was great. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure, it was great meeting you.
It was a pleasure.
Sure. Take it easy.